for downloading this episode of Cork Talk with me, Tim Atkin. A weekly conversation with some of the most famous people in the world of wine. Kate McIntyre MW's parents were pioneers in the cool climate of Victoria's Mornington Peninsula. But her initial intention was to be a theatre director rather than join the family business. Now, she's an essential part of Moorooduc Estate, working alongside her dad, Richard. A passionate Europhile, experienced show judge, wine writer and educator, she's the ideal person to chat to about Australian Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Gris. Hello, Kate. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
It is, and you're joining us from the Mornington Peninsula, and it's your dad's birthday, which is very selfless of you to be doing a podcast on your dad's birthday.
Absolutely. Well, we couldn't get the family together today, so we're doing birthday celebrations tomorrow, so to drag it out a little bit. So it's lovely to be here.
Okay. And you're just finishing vintage, presumably, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. It's been a really early vintage this year, and we got almost all of our fruit, barring the Shiraz, in before the end of February. We're just final pressings off of red wine and putting things into barrels, and it's all. I think we'll be ready to go on holiday in a week or so.
and early because of climate change. I hate to ask.
Yeah, but... absolutely. It's been we had a very dry winter, and we have noticed that the season has changed significantly in the last 10 years. So. Spring starts earlier, the vines wake up earlier, everything kind of happens earlier. We're still getting a good long ripening period, but because it's been dry all season, and it's been not too hot, not too cold, it's been that Goldilocks weather that the vines love. Everything just kind of ripens slowly and gradually, and everything was ready in early February. So yeah, earliest vintage ever.
Sounds ripper, as you say in Australia.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Well, we're very happy with the quality as well. Quantity, we could have a little bit more quantity, but good quality. Yeah.
I mean, I was fascinated when I was researching, your background. We'll talk about France in a minute and your love of French language and literature, which I share. But you weren't quite born into the wine business. But I've read that, your first ever vintage, you were 9 at Mount Mary. Yeah. I mean, were your parents there? Did they pay you to pick grapes or not?
No, they didn't. We'd just come. Dad was a young surgeon at the time. We'd been living in England for 4 years while he finished his training and did some extra study, and we sort of got stuck there for a while. And we came back. He'd wanted to have a vineyard for as long as he could remember. And we came back and everything had changed in Australia. We left in 1976 and came back in 1980. And the Yarra Valley had really kicked off again by then. And being a doctor, he kind of got involved with the other doctors in the wine industry. And Mount Mary was one of the places that we went picking in the early days. And Dad tells a charming, slightly precocious story about me. When we did the pickings, it was very, very classical Australian sort of 1980s behaviour, that all the women after the picking would go and help get the salads and the lunch ready, and the men would go off tasting wine from barrels. And I kind of wandered over to the wine tasting because I thought that looked more interesting, and had a little tasting. And I think my first tasting note was not bad for homemade, which I'm not sure. I'm not sure how well that was received, but I was always interested in flavours and smells, and I think that it was good fun. But no, I didn't get paid. Just doing it for the love of it, and because my parents made me.
Yeah, and they loved it so much that your parents, Richard and Jill, bought a piece of land in the Mornington Peninsula in 82. I mean, was the idea from the start not to build a house there? Presumably it's to make wine, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Dad's plan was to sort of finance the early years of the wine business with leftovers from his surgical career. Bank managers like doctors a lot better than they like grape growers and winemakers. So it was a good overlap for him. But he really wanted to be a winemaker. He didn't want to be an old doctor who people were trying to keep away from the patients. So he thought it was a really sensible idea to grow some grapes and make some wine. Took a lot longer for the business to actually support itself, but as a kid, I was the eldest of 4, and had the option of going to ballet school with mum to watch my sisters do ballet, or go to the vineyard with dad. So from about 12 years of age, I'd go down to the vineyard with dad and help out or sulk in the car, whatever mood I was in at the time. So yeah,
I mean, they were pioneers, really, weren't they, in the Mornington Peninsula? I mean, who had planted before them?
Well, I think they were about the fifth or sixth vineyard to be planted down there. There was Mainridge Estate was planted in 1975, and they were the first Pinot Noir vines to go in the ground on the Mornington Peninsula. And I think LG Park was 1972. There were a couple of others. Dad and Gary Crittenden were looking for land together. So I think Gary bought what became originally Dramana Estate and now is Crittenden Estate maybe 6 months before Dad bought the property that became Moorooduc Estate. And I think Stonier was there in the late 70s, Merrick's Estate. So, yeah, there's five or six before us, but there's over 200 now. So it's really things have changed over the last 40 years or so.
That's amazing. 200 wineries in the Mornington Peninsula.
Yeah.
And it was just an empty paddock, right, when they bought it?
It was. It's 20 acres, and it was an empty paddock. It had a fence down the middle of it and a dead tree in the middle of it, and that was it. So the first thing we did was dig a dam, and that was in the winter of 1982, I think, and it was the end of a drought back then, and it started raining. It's the first time that we've had that much rain to fill the dam in one winter. We've had 2 other winters since then where the dam's filled completely. But it was amazing. And then planted some trees around the edge to give us a windbreak, and then eventually some vines. I remember when Dad was trying to get vine cuttings together, because everything was on own roots originally. We went up to Best Great Western for a long weekend, and I think Mum took us kids antiquing and afternoon teaing while Dad took cuttings from Best Great Western. So, yeah.
That was a good move. I mean, interesting that, despite your love of wine as a kid, really, I mean, you were in the vineyards at 12, you studied drama, theatre, and as I did, French language and literature at university. So, I mean, is it true you didn't want to get involved in the wine industry? You sort of thought maybe this isn't for me?
I didn't realise that there was a possibility to have, a serious job in the wine industry. I just thought it was Mum and Dad having a midlife crisis, to be perfectly honest. That's what old people do when they can't do their real job anymore. They go and get a farm and grow some grapes. I really had no idea. I think it's one of those, when you're a kid and you grow up with stuff and it's just sort of second nature, you don't realise how special it is. You don't understand really what the opportunities are. And I had my own path. I thought I was going to be I thought I was going to be a theatre director for a while there. I loved acting, but I knew I wasn't quite brave enough to try and be a full-time actor. I love directing. I love bossing people around and kind of putting people places and, organising stuff. So that was one thing. And I thought, well, I can always teach French. I could be a teacher or I could be a travel agent. Those are the sort of, I wanted to travel. I wanted to speak French. I wanted to perform. And I didn't realise I could do all of those things in the wine industry until much later. It's kind of happened incrementally.
Yeah, but do you think having an arts background gives you a slightly different take on wine? I mean, obviously less scientific, a bit like me, but does it give you a different take?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've always loved words. I've always loved language. I've always loved trying to describe things that I'm experiencing. I also thought I might have been I might write some novels or something. I might do that later on in life, who knows. But I think having an arts background, I always think of wine as being a real kind of combination of art and science. And I think Dad brings the science to Moorooduc. He's a real scientist. He loves all of that. I bring the talk and the words and the artistic kind of temperament, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, you were slowly pivoting towards food and wine because you had part of your degree was you spent some time in Lyon, a fantastic city,
yeah.
And you wrote this thesis about the importance of food and wine to French cultural identity. I mean, what conclusions did you reach? I mean, massively important, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was looking at the Bouchon de Lyon and the tradition of restaurantation in France, and then how fast food and the sort of the how that culture of fast food has really changed the way the French live and work, and my conclusion was that, you know, up until then, and this was in 1996, I think, McDonald's was really seen by the French as a bit of a special treat, something for kids, birthday party kind of a thing. It wasn't seen as real food. But there were all the French kind of fast food kind of options of the, you know, your jambon beurre sandwich from the bakery, or croque monsieur was quite popular back then. So it was definitely, and that tradition of going home or going to a restaurant for a proper meal at lunchtime was definitely in the past, and I thought that was a terribly sad thing, and I think that we've moved further away from that in France now. And we sort of look also, Elizabeth David was one of my sort of heroes from very early on. Mum is an incredible cook, and she's sort of self-taught, and she introduced me to Elizabeth David as a teenager, and so I sort of felt like I was following in her footsteps a little bit, looking at food in France, and they were when you go to France, it's very hard to separate the French language from the French food, and now the French wine as well. It's all pretty awesome. So
it is funny. It used to frustrate me when I lived in Paris that people would never stop for you on pedestrian crossings. And somebody said to me, the way to get the French to stop on pedestrian crossings is to have a cake in your hand and walk across the pedestrian crossing with a cake, because they'll never run you over if you're carrying a cake.
That's fabulous.
Classic, don't you think?
Absolutely classic.
Anyway, so you came back to Australia, and you got a job in wine retail, at Philip Murphy Wine and Sons. Was that a kind of eureka moment? You thought, okay, I can do wine now?
Well, it was actually a complete fluke. I'd put my name down for a course at the Victorian College of the Arts, a theatre directing course, and I'd got a spot in the course, but then the then Premier of Victoria pulled the funding from the arts that year, and so I had a year to fill in, and I thought, well, I'll get a job, earn some money, go travelling again. And I thought, what do I know? And I thought, I don't know much. So I applied for jobs in bookshops and wine shops, and this job opportunity came up. I went into the interview. I lied about wanting to learn more about wine, but I thought, well, you know, how bad can it be? And Philip, I remember in the interview, Philip took me completely seriously, bless his soul. And he said, look, we're looking for someone who has a bit of education and can read the labels of the French and the Italian wine bottles, because I'd studied Italian at school as well. So I said, oh yeah, no worries, I can do that. And he said, it's wonderful that you've got this wine background and that you want to learn more about wine. We're looking for someone to be the assistant to the fine wine manager. So I said, oh, that sounds all right, and started the job. And everyone took my feigned interest in wine seriously, and everyone in the store went out of their way to teach me what they knew about wine, and it was absolutely fascinating. And I was hooked within about 2 weeks, I reckon, if not sooner. I spent my first paycheck on a dozen bottles of wine to kind of get my head around, the Italian and French wines that were going to be recommended to me, and I never looked back after that. It was awesome. I haven't gone back to the theatre since.
And then you got a job with an Italian wine importer, so the Italian came in useful. This is Trembath Taylor Tucker. So Italian wine was becoming a passion as well. I mean, was it you that persuaded your dad to plant Nebbiolo later on, or not?
Well, he and I have drunk a lot of Barolo since I started learning about Italian wine. So I think I did introduce him to Barolo and to Nebbiolo, and we came up with the mad idea together. And we've sort of asked a lot of viticultural experts in Australia, and they all think we're crazy, but because it's a little cool, it's a little cooler than people think is ideal for Nebbiolo on the Mornington Peninsula. But we have a warmer site. But yeah, I find Italian wines really fascinating, and I've always had sort of a love affair with the Italian and the French culture. I really struggled to decide which language to specialise in when I was finishing school and when I went to university, and it was really just me following my nose again that got me down the French path. But the Italians I love as well, and I think I made the right choice, because you go to France and unless you can speak really good French, they won't engage with you, whereas the Italians, a few words and they think you're wonderful, and they're so kind. They're so kind and so enthusiastic that, I think I did right.
I mean, they share a love of food and wine, obviously, but they're very different places, aren't they? I mean, it's a huge generalization, but I mean, it's just the Italians are a bit warmer, a bit more volatile. Do you think? What else is it about them?
Yeah, I think I have a theory. My theory is that, and it goes for everything about the French and the Italians, but I think it particularly works with wine. That when you're talking to French people about French wine, they're very proud of what they've created, and you sort of say, well, what about all of the rules that you have around the way you have to produce your wine? And they say, well, this is French wine, and we're in France, and we're the French, and we made the rules, so they must be right. So we'll follow them, and we make the best wine because of it. Whereas the Italians are wonderfully shambolic, and they're like, well, someone's trying to impose rules on me with the DOC and the DOCG. How far can I push the system? How far can I what can I get away with before I get into really serious trouble in Italy? Mm-hmm. And the people trying to control the DOC, DOCG are chasing after all the winemakers, saying, oh, we'll change that rule so that you're back in, and we'll change that rule. So I think the Italians have this shambolic creativeness, which is really very, very lovely. But it's always nice to go back to France to the order and it's 2:10, so you can't possibly have a table at a restaurant for lunch. You've missed out on lunch. Whereas in Italy, they're like, oh, no worries, here you go, sit down, eat, drink, whatever, all day, all night.
Somebody once said, I think, that with EU directives, that the Germans read the directives and follow them, the French read them and put them in the bin, and the Italians just put them in the bin. They don't even read them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, so 2004, you joined the family business on a part-time basis. I mean, was it starting to make a bit of money and you thought, okay, there's an opening for me here? Did your dad say, come on board?
There were a few things that happened back then. I was trying to pass MW exams, and so I'd taken some time off work and trying to study full-time, and I worked out pretty quickly that was not good for my brain to just be studying and not doing anything else. So instead of trying to get a full-time job somewhere else, I said, can I help out with things at Moorooduc? They were in between distributors, so they needed some help with the marketing side of things. Dad's always been excellent with the winemaking and the science and stuff, but dreadful with the promotional side of things. So I could help there. I'd been selling wine for a while by that stage. And I also wasn't sure whether there was a space for me in the family business, but thought I could help them out for a bit and do a bit of my own thing as well on the side. So I was looking at setting up my own sort of consulting business and doing a bit of wine writing and a bit of, this and a bit of that. And the longer I worked part-time in the family business and the more I progressed through understanding the wine industry through my MW studies, the more I realised that what Mum and Dad were doing was really, really special and actually something that I wanted to be involved in and wanted to learn more about and be part of the next phase of the family business. So yeah, it's sort of it took me a while. I was a bit of a slow learner, but I got there in the end.
And you stuck around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wonderful. And it's weird to think that I've been back there since 2004 because it doesn't feel like that long.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah.
Some people listening to this podcast will never have been to the Mornington Peninsula, beautiful part of the world, as I know. Just tell us briefly a little bit about its terroirs and climatic influences and different subregions, because there are different bits of it as well, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because we're quite a young region, 40, 45 years old, really, we're still learning, but we've done a lot of work on looking at the soils and the aspects of vineyards and that kind of thing. It's a really small region. It takes about an hour to drive from the top to the bottom. It looks a bit like a wonky version of Italy. It looks like a wonky boot that sticks out in between Port Phillip Bay and Western Port Bay. So it's got water on three sides of it. So it's a true peninsula. It's narrow. It's got some really nice beaches, which is what a lot of Melburnians know about our region. There's a lot of nice holiday houses around the edges and the wine regions in the middle, in the hinterland. We've been evolving our understanding of the different the different areas within the peninsula and the different sites. And we started off talking about up the hill and down the hill, and up the hill is the southern part, which is sort of Arthur's Seat, Main Ridge, Red Hill. That gets up to about 300 metres above sea level. It's an old volcanic sort of eruption that was under the sea for a long time, millions of years ago. They've got volcanic soil there. It's right in the path of all of the weather that comes in from the south. So it's very cold. It's got a lot of cooling influences on it. We're in the northern part of the peninsula, which is down the hill. Our vineyard is about 90 metres above sea level at the top of the vineyard, and we're about as high as you get in the Moorooduc subregion of the peninsula. So we're lower down. We're sheltered by that southern part of the peninsula from most of the southerly weather, but we get a lot of weather that comes from the east and the west, and mostly from the west that comes across. In winter, it's quite cold. In spring, we get quite a lot of hailstorms and rain squalls and things like that. So it can be quite hairy during flowering and fruit set. In summer, we get a lot of warm winds that come across from the west, and they come all the way from Perth sometimes, but across through Adelaide and the South Australian wine regions. They come across to us over the desert, so it gets hotter and drier as the winds come across. They hit the Bellarine Peninsula and Geelong, and that region gets really hot and dry, and then they hit the Port Phillip Bay before they get to us, and it's not a big difference, but it cools the air down and moistens the air enough that it's a really distinct difference from where we are compared to just across the bay. And it makes it a really special place to grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And we're discovering more and more really high-quality Pinot Gris as well. Pinot Gris has been sort of treated a bit badly, I think, by a lot of Australian grape growers and winemakers, but when it's grown in the right place and treated with some love and respect, it can make beautiful wine, as we know from the French and Italian versions.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And you make that lovely Pinot Gris called Pinot Gris on skins, don't you?
Yeah. Yep. And that was an inspiration from a trip to Umbria in 2010. Just after I passed my Master of Wine, I thought I knew a bit about wine at that stage, and I went to Umbria and tasted all these crazy skinsy wines that were delicious, and just was mind blown and boggled and amazed. And I came home and sort of annoyed my father for about 5 years before he finally gave in and said, "Okay, what are we going to do with this half a ton of fruit?" And it's been a really lovely addition to the portfolio, and lots of fun, yummy wine, delicious with food, and a bit different from everything else we do.
Tell us about the way you farm, because I know you work with Dr. Dylan Grigg, who's also appeared on the podcast, a good mutual friend of ours. He's kind of into regenerative stuff, isn't he? I mean, tell us how you farm. Are you organic, biodynamic, sustainable, regenerative? How do you work? Yeah,
so we started the regenerative journey about 5 years ago, I think. Dad's, again, the vineyard, it's 12 acres under vine where we are, and then we've got 4 other vineyards that we lease. And so we have most control over our vineyard. Dylan's been amazing, just helping us with, because we have very sandy topsoil and sandy clay and a lot of sort of pure sand through the vineyard. Our new plantings have had a bit of trouble getting through the sand and things to get down into the clay. And Dylan's been amazing helping us with that. But the regenerative viticulture, regenerative agriculture is something that we're really fascinated by. Dad, as I said earlier, is a scientist, and he liked the idea of organics, but it's very hard to be organic where we are because there's too much disease pressure. And we also worry about, if you could only put copper and sulfur on your vineyard and you're putting huge amounts of copper and sulfur on the vineyard, particularly the copper can be a problem in the soil. We're looking at really making the soil healthier rather than just keeping the vines safe. And so lots of cover crops. we've had a wonderful time with cover crops. Actually, we had a beautiful field full of sunflowers a year and a half ago. We've had turnips and kohlrabi radish in the vineyard in the last season, and we're still turning up turnips and kohlrabi every now and again, going, oh, look at this. So that's good fun, yeah. But it's a beautiful way to farm. It gets out of control just before you get to the stage of sort of crushing it all back down into the ground. But it looks beautiful, and the vines, amazingly, the vines are already 5 years in looking healthier. The soil's looking less compacted. We're seeing all these wonderful mushrooms and fungi popping up in the vineyard these days. We've got a lot of biodiversity as far as friendly insects as well, lots of butterflies and things around. We spray as little as possible in the vineyard, and, there's still things that we're trying to work out, under the vine, very hard to keep that under control without any use of herbicides, but we're getting there. We'd like to get some animals into the vineyard, but we don't have a front gate on the property at the moment, so we're going to have to improve our fencing before we do that. So,
otherwise they'll just wander off, right?
Yeah. Oh, where have the sheep gone? Oh, they're down the road again. But yeah, it's great.
Go on. I want to ask you about what made you want to become an MW. I mean, are you naturally quite a studious person?
Yeah, I am. And when I started working in the wine industry and realised that this could be a career, I thought, well, I don't have any qualifications whatsoever. And I looked at the options, and in Australia there was no WSET here, except Steve Charters was teaching, I think, level 3 in Perth. And I'm like, I'm not going to Perth to do WSET. I could have done Roseworthy wine marketing or winemaking, but I didn't want to do that, which is ironic because that's sort of where I've ended up with, particularly with the marketing side of things, but also getting my hands dirty during vintage. I wanted to have a qualification that was about the whole world of wine. For a long time, I wasn't that interested in Australia. I was looking out at the rest of the world and wanting to learn that. And my very dear friend and my boss for a little while, Michael Trembath, who was part of the Trembath Taylor Tucker management team, was studying for his Master of Wine at the time, and he said, "Oh, I reckon you'd be quite good at this, Kate." And I've gone, "Oh, okay." So I went along to an introductory thing, and I remember watching a group of MWs up the front, sort of showing us how it was done, and I thought, that's really cool. I want to learn how to do that. I'd also had some successes in my early stages at Philip Murphy's with tasting competitions and things like that, and so I'd convinced myself I was pretty good at that. I was pretty good at tasting, and I knew how to write an essay, and I had the requisite skills to become a Master of Wine. I realised once I was on the program that I was way in over my head for a long time. It was the arrogance of youth nearly brought me undone, but I'm also very stubborn, so I kept going and got there in the end.
It's interesting because your dissertation was on perceptions of Australian Chardonnay and whether it was in crisis. And this was 2010 when you passed, so you were probably writing it 2009, I suppose. I mean, Was it? Is it? I mean, Aussie Chardonnay to me seems world class. It's almost what you do best where white wines are concerned.
It absolutely is, and that's why I wanted to do this research, because I was absolutely astonished in sort of 2006, 2007, 2008. Our distributors were coming to us saying, nobody wants to buy Chardonnay. We can't sell you Chardonnay. It's impossible. I think this was partly a little bit of a weak spot in their sales technique, but because we had people still coming into cellar door, people would say, I won't taste the white wines because I don't like Chardonnay. I'll just taste the Pinots. It's like, well, we've got this dreadful dirt road that you have to drive down to get to us. It's like, you've made it here. You might as well taste the Chardonnays. Taste one of the Chardonnays. And the response that we got over and over again was, I don't usually like Chardonnay, but I like this. And if they had the conversation, then you'd really discover that what they didn't like was the way that a lot of Australian Chardonnay was being made. It was being picked over ripe. It had too much winemaking flavours, too much oak, too much Malo, too much butteriness, and they decided that they liked New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc because it was kind of the opposite. And it was a real epidemic back then. And I thought, I think it's illusory. I think that people really don't know what they're talking about most of the time when they say they don't like Chardonnay. They just haven't tasted the right Chardonnay. So I did the research, and it came around. It was really interesting because there was one person out of all of the people who I did blind tastings with who actually didn't like any of the Chardonnays I showed her. So I believe that there are people who don't like Chardonnay out there, but most of the people who thought they didn't like Chardonnay just hadn't had a good one, or hadn't had a different style of one. And also, I mean, in Australia, you still get people who say, oh, I don't like Chardonnay. And you say, oh, what do you like to drink? Oh, I love Chablis. It's like, oh, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And what about Pinot Noir? I mean, Craig Smith, I don't know if you remember Craig, who used to run the Australian Wine Centre off the Strand in London. He was the self-appointed secretary of the Australian Pinot Noir Why Do They Bother Society. That was in about 1990. And yet now, I mean, where does Aussie Pinot Noir sit in the world rankings? Pretty high, I'd say. I mean, what changed? Was it clones? Was it site? Was it better winemaking? A bit of everything? What was it? Everything? Was it people travelling?
I honestly think it's a bit of everything. I think we had the wrong clones in the early days. We didn't know what we were doing. Back in 1982, 83, when Dad was deciding what he wanted to plant, he really wanted to plant Pinot Noir, and he got some advice from some viticulturists, and they said, oh, no, don't bother planting that. It's never going to work anywhere outside of Burgundy. Now, 1982, 83 probably sounds like quite a long time ago for a lot of people, but for most of us, it's those of us who've been in the industry for this long, it's amazing how it's changed over the last 40 years. So I would say sheer stubbornness from the people who decided that they loved Pinot Noir in Australia and knew that it could work. A lot of work on bringing the right clones in over time, a lot of work on understanding how to deal with Pinot Noir in the vineyard, not to over-ripen it, because I think a lot of Australian Pinot Noir in the early days, particularly from cool climates, was left on the vine for too long because we were scared it was going to be underripe. So then we got to over-ripen. It was kind of flabby as a result. Vine age is really important. And I think that as the vines are getting older, we're getting better and better Pinot Noir out of our good sites. And I think we're more confident with what we're doing. We're not sort of second guessing ourselves all the time. The other thing, like, so much has changed in winemaking over the time we've been making wine at Moorooduc. In the 90s, Dad started experimenting with wild yeast ferments because he'd been to France and talked to some winemakers and learned about wild ferments. And instead of talking to a whole lot of people in Australia who would have said, oh, no, they're different yeasts, don't do it, it's not going to work, he just did the experiments and they work really well. And these days wild ferments are really normal in Australia, but they weren't back then, and people were a bit shocked that he was doing these crazy things. So, yeah.
Tell me how much of your time is spent writing about wine, because you're a very good writer. I mean, is it something you enjoy?
I love writing. I need to get back to doing some more writing because I'm not doing enough at the moment. I just wrote our website, so but I've been a bit distracted from writing nice things about wine by having to write a lot of communication about us and about what we're trying to do and that kind of thing for the website and for newsletters and things like that. But I feel like I'm getting the itch to write something a little more creative about wine again soon.
Maybe it's a book.
I just have to. Yeah, maybe it is a book, Tim. We'll see how that goes. I just need to kind of clear a little space in life, but I feel like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, absolutely.
That's it. And you like teaching as well, don't you? You're a very good teacher.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. I love talking to people about why wine is so exciting and why it's so simple yet so complex, the way it's made, how it tastes, what it does, all of these things. I think it's it's wonderful to have a room full of people and to be able to talk to people about what's in the glass and see them having those aha moments, the light bulbs going on over their heads. Yeah. It's just gorgeous. It's wonderful. I'll never get sick of that. Yeah.
I mean, I met you, I think, or got to know you well at the Melbourne show, Royal Melbourne show a few years ago, probably 2010, wasn't it? After you just passed. Yeah. Lots of fun. Are you still judging? And I just wonder, how important is the show system now to the wine industry? Because it was very important back then, wasn't it? Are people a bit more relaxed about it now, maybe?
I think it's important to a lot of people. I don't do any judging anymore. I sort of wiggled backwards out of it over a few years, and it didn't really. I loved doing it to be with the other people and the social side of it, but I didn't really feel that I got a lot out of the experience of tasting wines in that way. And I think my appreciation of wine tasting has evolved over the years, that I think tasting less wines more slowly in a more contemplative way, that helps me find the wines that I'm excited about. I think lining 60 wines up and trying to work out which one's the best and which one's the worst and everything in between in half an hour I just find it very stressful and unpleasant, to be honest, and your mouth hurts at the end of it. So so for me, the show system is something that I've left in the past. I learned a lot from it. I think that for some people it's really important. I think that there are a lot of other people who have the confidence to know that they're making good wine. It might not necessarily be a wine that does well in a beauty parade, but if you know that you're making good wine and that people like drinking it and that it's going to evolve, it's got the potential to age, that it's, serious and delicious, then I think there are better ways of getting it into people's glasses than the show system these days.
Than a gold medal somewhere, yeah. I mean, a slightly serious question is about climate change, really, and how that's affecting the Mornington Peninsula. Will it be growing different varieties in 20 years' time? I mean, you guys have got Nebbiolo, you've got Syrah. I mean, your dad originally planted Cabernet, didn't he? I mean, he pulled that out or grafted it over, right?
Yeah, it's funny because we grafted it over and we pulled it out back in 2020 because the Pinot grafts were failing. And I think if we hadn't had a pandemic in 2020, then we might have done something different with those Cabernet vines. At least some of them, we might have cut the tops off and seen what happened if we let them grow back. Because I do think the climate is much more Cabernet friendly these days than it was 30, 40 years ago. That said, Cabernet is so deeply unfashionable in this country anyway. I think you'd have to be a very brave person to plant Cabernet right now, which is another sad thing because, great Cabernet is delicious, but, got to sell the stuff that we make. But I think we're very concerned that it could get too hot for Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and more so it could get too dry. Water is a huge and growing problem in Australia generally, and where we are, it's wetter than most parts of Australia, so we're really lucky. But still, we've had some really dry years, and the vineyards that are able to survive without irrigation, and our site doesn't get irrigated after its first 5 years in the ground. Then, if you can grow vines without irrigation, then that's a real plus in this country these days. And yes, it's why we've planted Nebbiolo. We've replanted the old Cabernet vineyard with Pinot Noir, but we've left 2 rows empty. And we're working on a program of planting sort of 8 vines of a number of different vines as trials. We're really keen on Mencia. We're really keen on Blaufränkisch. We are thinking about putting some Grenache in, which again is slightly mad, but we're talking to Dylan about that. And some white grape varieties. Dad's really interested to learn more about the Peewees. We don't know much about them yet, but I'm off to the MW UK trip in September, so I'll learn a bit more about them there. I think. About them. Yeah, absolutely. We're Go on.
The final question is how do you get away from wine? I mean, are you like food? Are you like cooking? Do you still read French literature? You said you don't go to the theatre anymore. I bet you do. Do you not sneak in occasionally into Melbourne?
I do. I go to the theatre. I have, I don't have children of my own, but I've got 3 gorgeous nieces. So it's been really fun taking them to musical theatre over the years. That's been very fun. I have a standard poodle who requires lots of walking. So we do a lot of walking together. I really enjoy getting
PX,
out into nature. Right? No, PX was the last one. This is Polly.
Oh, all right.
PX,
Sorry.
No, that's okay. PX was a great name for him, though. It was I wasn't quite so inspired when I came to naming her. But yeah, we do lots of walking. In winter, if I can find some snow, I love downhill skiing and backcountry skiing. When I'm feeling fit enough, I try and practice yoga regularly. So a bit of activity, bit of brain food, I do love cooking. I love having people over for dinner. So, that involves wine as well, though.
Exactly. Sounds like the perfect mix. It's been too long since we had dinner. I hope to see you very soon in London when you're over. Great talking to you. Thank you so much, especially for joining us on your dad's birthday. I mean, give your dad a hug and have a glass of wine with him if you don't do it today, because it's probably a bit late now where you are. Do it tomorrow. All right. See you soon, Kate.
Thanks, Tim. Cheers.
I never knew that Kate and I share a love of France. What a warm and intelligent person. Next week on Cork Talk, my guest is Brian McRobert from McRobert and Canals in Rioja. Join me then. Thanks for listening to Cork Talk. If you want to read more reports, articles and tasting notes by me, go to my website, timatkin.com. You can also follow me on Twitter @TimAtkin and on Instagram @TimAtkinMW. See you next week.